Morning, everyone.
Good morning, Mr. Ken. Here's my
Hey, Noah,
apple, Mr. Ken.
you turn these down a little? Thank you. Well, what's on everyone's mind this morning?
Jesus.
You always say that.
No more shackles.
Go ahead, go.
Ushers. It's 'cause I'm on my second cup of coffee.
You know what he should be singing? No more doctors. No more pain.
Praise God. Hallelujah. Thank
No more chemo. Again and again.
you. Again and again.
Congratulations. That's a milestone.
You know, the last radiation that we had, the kids come over, unbeknownst to us, and took shoe polish and wrote all over our windows on our car, last chemo, no more, and stuff like that. Well, we didn't have time to do anything about that because we were on our way to the last one, and so we just drove the car on down the freeway with all that stuff on it, and you know how many honks and people going like this, and it was all the way down the freeway. It was kind of neat. 40 straight days of that. Yeah. But you know what? We're here. Redeemed people may count on the Lord leading them with his presence to wherever he wants them to be. Think about that. Redeemed people may count on the Lord leading them with his presence wherever he wants them to be. Give me that first picture, would you, Bev? The map. There you go. You know, I was preparing for this, and I heard something this morning, and I'm not sure, I don't know, it was in Genesis, that talked about when Joseph sent for Jacob and the family. And he was talking about how Jacob was hesitant to go, not knowing how they would be received by Joseph until he saw the wagons, which was proof Joseph was coming to get him through God's direction. When the wagon showed up, Jacob was sure the kids, which had lied to him in the past, were not lying to him now. And one of the things that when they got to Beersheba, they stopped, which was right on the edge of the Egyptian border. Jacob stopped and built an altar to God and sacrificed animals on that altar. And God told him, go ahead and go, I'll be with you. And I'll make you into a great nation, and will bring you out. He carried that promise with him right into Egypt. Therefore, redeemed people may count on the Lord leading them with his presence to wherever he wants them to be. You know, I was thinking about all of you this morning, and I'm trying to make this personal so that you take something from it. And one of the things that I think we sometimes wonder about is, where am I supposed to be? What is it that I should be doing? What should I prepare for? And I'm thinking of these two. If God is with you,
Who can be against you?
who can be against you? And if God is with you and you're following God, then you're where you're supposed to be right now. This is where God wants you, Tammy. Right here. You don't have to go look for it. You're here. You're where you're supposed to be until God moves you somewhere else. So you don't have to sweat the small stuff. You're right where you should be. Doing right what you should do. And you should be comfortable with that. I think sometimes, I know I do, you're always trying to prepare for something in the future. At work, I'm always 2 weeks ahead of everybody else because I'm the one that buys the material and writes the contract and sees that they have the material, and if we have concrete coming, you have to order that ahead of time. In other words, I'm preparing for what they're doing in the near future. So they don't come to a job, pick up the work order, look at it and say, well, we don't have any aluminum for this. Now you're waiting 2 or 3 days to get material. But in your relationship with God, are you always the one looking to the future, or are you one following the leading of God? Are you the one worried about finding the job? Or are you the one who says, I'll go where God leads me, and for right now, I'm okay right here. I'm good. And just be comfortable in that. Enjoy that for now, because God will put you where He wants you to be. You don't have to figure everything out. You just have to follow the leading of God and be comfortable that that is God. And I heard something else this morning that I think I'll share with you. We've talked about this for a while, being worship. Do you know what one of the definitions of worship, or one of maybe we should say the results of worship is? It lessens your burden. Because you give it to God. You figure it out. I'll just worship you. I'll be glad that you're my friend. I'll be comfortable that you're looking out for my best interests, and I'm okay with that. I pray for that guy back there often. He's still waiting for the call. It's a lot of time to wait. Where's God? Why is God not either had the call made, or why doesn't God just heal his kidneys? God hasn't done either one yet. Is he carrying a burden? Sure. But he can come in here every Sunday and he can worship God, and he can give that burden back to God. Always here. And he reminds me of her. And I told her this before. She said something to me a couple of years ago that I still remind her of every so often. She walked in here sick one day. I said, well, what are you doing here? He needs to be here. Amen. This isn't an option to be here. This was a refilling station. This was a place for her to unload her burden. And in your prayer and talking to God, you give God your burdens. Let him carry them. You remind him, I'm where I'm supposed to be because you put me here. And I'm comfortable with that. Bless you. Romans 8, chapter 8, verse 14 says, all those led by God's Spirit are God's sons. God's got your back. And in chapter 16 of Exodus, that's where we're going right now, I need to remind you of some background which we've been studying and talking about. Prior to chapter 16, they had just come through the Red Sea. That had to be an incredible experience. Probably something I'll do very poorly at describing. I think that's one of those things you had to be there to see that. And I would think that would leave a permanent mark on you the rest of your entire life. Not only did they see the entire destruction of the Egyptian army, they saw their salvation through something that was impossible to happen. And yet God made a way. They saw them be rescued from the Egyptians. And not only did they get to leave, they got to take all of their jewelry and plunder with them. They didn't leave poor. Not only did they get to see the plagues that were brought upon the Egyptians, and yet they didn't suffer them. Because they, indeed, were the sons of God. And their reaction to seeing these leaders show up after they had once tried to lead them out of Egypt, come back 40 years later and do it again, but this time with God's leadership. Not only did they recognize that Moses was God's chosen vessel to lead them out, but they had that confirmed to them through the actions that God presented to them up to this point, including watching that Red Sea experience, which obviously they participated in themselves. The witness that they had to be able to present after that, wouldn't you have just liked to sit down with some of them or have them come this morning and tell you what they saw? Not what they read about. All I did was read about it. They saw that, David. They experienced that. That's a witness. I would venture to guess there's no one sitting here that would walk out of that room after they spoke and not believe there is a God. And this is what he did for me, and you're a candidate for the same thing to happen to you. So they get out of the Red Sea experience to the other side, and Miriam, Moses' sister, who's called a prophetess, she starts a Pentecostal party. And they shouted, they danced, they praised God, they sang, they had a party. Anybody know how long it lasts? Lasted a week. Finally, God says, time to move on. You ever been to a party, a Pentecostal move like that? I've been to a couple in here that lasted past midnight. I saw a revival break out here, and it started with a bunch of young people, which is where it always starts, because you got more energy than I do. True. And if they have the right leadership, they're going to go farther than we did. Because they're going to take our experience and continue on. So they had a Pentecostal party and moved on. And then 3 days later, we're going to read chapter 16. Father, touch this word this morning and put your hand on it. Stamp it with your approval. Let this touch our hearts this morning. Let this speak to us as you would. Use this as your tool to touch all of us and challenge us in different ways to make us better than when we came in here this morning, and take something with us. And everyone said amen. The whole Israelite community set out from Elim and came to the desert of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, and on the 15th day of the second month after they had come out of Egypt. So they're 30 days into this, they're into month 2. And where they are is right there in the wilderness of Shur. They're just starting their journey. In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt." They sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted, but you have brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death. You know, we're talking about roughly 2 to 3 million people. This wasn't like a dozen. Then they said to Moses, "I will rain down," or then the Lord said, let's stop there. I don't want to go that far yet. Moses is catching it from this group. I shouldn't even say this group, this multitude. And what are they accusing Moses of? First, they're accusing him of leading them out into the desert to kill them. What had they just walked through? Not enough. What had they just experienced in the last 30 days? 3 days later. Freedom. 3 days later. Now, there's a couple of things here that I want to point out to you. First of all, it would seem that starvation was more anticipated than experienced. They weren't actually starving, were they? But they were running out of food. The starvation that they are talking about is anticipated, not experienced. In other words, they did not live through weeks and weeks of famine, nor did they see their family and friends die of malnutrition, or even have to kill. Listen, you know what they didn't kill? Their own livestock. They had stakes walking behind them. They didn't kill any of their own livestock. What did they do instead? They complained to Moses. Instead, they started to feel hungry and they anticipated, not experienced, starvation. We anticipate the problems we're going to have because we didn't get a job as when we wanted. I can't move out when I want. I can't buy the new car. I can't get my own apartment yet. Am I hitting home here? Hitting home. and I'm not starving. I'm not without a vehicle. I just want, here's the American way, more. I want the better car, the bigger house, the better clothes, whatever. I want the $100 Jordans. Are they 200 now? When my kids were around, they were 100. They came to me and wanted $100 Jordans, Reuben. I said, they don't even make such a thing. Yes, they do. I finally told them, I says, I got a shop you can go work in if you want $100 Jordans, because I'm not buying the PF Flyers. They were good enough. They were $20. Converse. $60. Things have changed. But our American way of thinking has not changed. They're complaining to Moses and blaming their problems on him because they're anticipating things are coming up. Well, let's talk about that for just a second. They changed their singing 3 days earlier to complaining. Now, there's a couple of things regarding complainers that I thought about, and you're probably going to come up with more. It would appear that complainers have very selective memory. Would you agree with that? Listen to what they told Moses. They said, if we'd only died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. Weren't those the guys complaining that they wanted rescue? And listen how they describe their problems in Egypt. He says, there we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted, but you brought us into the desert to die or to starve this entire assembly to death. Is that the description of the lifestyle they were living in Egypt? They sat around pots and ate all they wanted. That's not quite how I remember reading that. You see, what they've done is they've changed their memory or their description of history to fit their own accusations. We've never seen that in the church, have we? I can't go to church here, Mike. It's too hot. It's too cold. Music's too loud. Music's not loud enough. And those are just the superficial stuff we hear. I don't like the attitude that Brian has. Carlos doesn't even know he's alive. You're not going to live that one down, pal. You know, I have a memory like an elephant, but only for certain things. It's funny how we remember things, especially if we're trying to make a point. Complainers. What else do complainers do? Well, I wrote down they attack leaders. You ever had them attack you? You're a bad guy. Why does misery want company? Not only do I want to be miserable, I wouldn't even mind if you were miserable with me. Why does this sound funny to you? Am I touching home? You see, these people haven't changed from us. Moses brought them out here to kill them. What would he gain by doing that? And they're saying, let me remind you of the point I'm trying to make. They're accusing him of all this after what they had just seen and experienced. Wouldn't you think, I started this by telling you, wouldn't you think, seeing and experience, if nothing else, discount the plagues and the Passover. The Passover, guys, They saw the Passover. And they never experienced it themselves. Huge. They saw the Red Sea part. 3 deals, 3 days. This is what they're telling Moses after 3 days. Now let me back up and read you something. I'm in verse 15, right at the end. They had been complaining about getting out into the desert for 3 days, running out of water. Moses takes them and leads them to water with God's leading, by the way. Don't forget, Moses isn't just randomly going through the desert. He's following a pillar. A cloud and fire. This isn't Moses leading. This is Moses following. When they attack Moses, they're attacking God's spokesman. If you're going to go attack Art, and Art's telling me, and he told me this several times. In fact, I think you told me this last week. He says he's got a message from God that he comes up here and tells you about. You better be careful about attacking Art. Because he's just the spokesman. Moses is just the spokesman. And they went after him. Paula wants to talk to you after church. Moses is just the spokesman. They're really going after God. And Moses is going to remind them of that in a minute. But look at verse in chapter 15. In verse 25. Then the Lord issued a ruling and instructions for them and put them to the test. He's going to talk to them about food and provision. And he said, if you listen carefully, notice that? If you listen carefully to the Lord your God and do what is right in his eyes. If you pay attention to his commands and keep all his decrees, I will not bring on you any of the diseases I brought on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you. Then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs and 70 palm trees, and they camped near the water. There's another promise. If you do what I ask you to do, I can make your life pretty good. I cannot have any disease come upon you. No disease, David. I can keep you. I hear a lot of people today tell me that they want to get married because they want to feel safe. They want to feel wanted. And I hear God telling us that. I want to keep you safe. He even talks about the church being what? A bride. I hear and see God doing exactly what we've talked about so many times in here, Christina. It's the picture of not me reaching up to God. It's a picture of God reaching down to me. We always think that we're the ones reaching up to God. I think we have that turned around. And God makes provision after provision after provision for us, Linda. And in 3 days we ignore it. So they attack Moses. They attack the leader. They accuse him of killing them. And what does God do? We're going to starve in the desert, this entire assembly, to death. Then the Lord said to Moses in verse 4, I'll rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are going to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way I will test them to see whether they will follow my instructions. On the sixth day they are to prepare what they bring in, and that is to be twice as much as they gather on the other days. So Moses and Aaron said to all the Israelites, in the evening you will know that it was the Lord who brought you out of Egypt. See, he's starting to remind them too. And what does he tell them? God's going to come to your rescue one more time. And it's going to be a supernatural event that you wouldn't even think about doing. It's going to rain food. In the desert, remind you. And in the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your grumblings against him. When he heard the grumblings against God, he didn't react meanly. It wasn't revenge time. It was fulfill time. Moses says, who are we that you should grumble against us? Moses also said, you will know that it is the Lord when he gives you meat to eat in the morning, and all the bread you want meat in the evening, and all the bread you want in the morning, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we? You're not grumbling against us, but you're grumbling against God. Now, he gives them rules regarding this manna. Give me the definition for manna. Do you know?
What is it?
There you go. What is it? That's what manna means. They'd never seen it before. It don't rain bread. Except around the Israelites. It does rain bread around the Israelites. For 40 years.
So the cartoon with the chance of meatballs was right?
All this time. But there were some instructions with this, and regarding that manna, before I forget. The Bible never calls it manna. The Israelites do. What does God call it? Bread from heaven. And God in the Bible always refer to that as bread from heaven, and the Israelites all refer to it as, what is it? And I read that, and maybe I'm wrong in what I'm thinking, but it almost sounds like a slight to me. What is it? And God keeps saying, it's bread from heaven. It's almost like they don't want to acknowledge the source. But God gives them some instructions to follow in picking up their own food. First of all, give me some of the instructions or rules that God laid out for this.
Just pick up what you need for the day.
What you need for the day. Well, why don't I pick up what I need for 2 or 3 days, and then I don't have to go out there every morning? There's nothing wrong with storing up a little in advance. That's the American way. We lay it aside for a rainy day.
There's a lot of people to feed.
There was over 2 million. It's raining a lot of bread. But they were not told to keep that. What happened if they picked up excess? It went bad. It spoiled. Except on Friday. Then they were allowed to keep 2 days' worth because they were not allowed to work on the Sabbath. It almost seems like God was really making a point about this Sabbath. Secondly, they had to pick up their own bread. Why don't we just make, oh, Reuben's got 3 kids. Why don't you just take your kids in the mornings and you go pick up enough bread for all of us? They got lots of energy. Why not put them to work?
I can barely get them to church on time.
Bigger stick, Reuben. Only thing Reuben can pick up is bread for his family. Bible says I got to pick up my own bread. Look at verse 16. Moses said to them, "Is the bread the Lord has given you to eat? This is what the Lord has commanded. Everyone is to gather as much as they need. Take an omer for each person you have in the tent." That was roughly about a quart. The Israelites did as they were told, but some gathered too much and some little. And when they measured it by one omer, the one who gathered much did not have too much, and the one who gathered little did not have too little. Everyone had gathered just as much as they needed. No access, except on Friday. Why no access, Tammy? We're just going to get more tomorrow. But that's going to cause you a problem. Because for you to want to get more tomorrow, you have to know there's more available tomorrow. What if it doesn't show up tomorrow? What are you doing when you tell me there's more for tomorrow? You're basing that opinion on relying on the fact that you believe God will provide tomorrow. Right? For you to tell me I can get more tomorrow means you have to believe I'll get more by going out there tomorrow and there'll be more there. God may have forgot you. What's God teaching you to do? Rely on Him. For what kind of need, Tammy? Everything. But you need it how often, Paula? Every day. Every day. You don't get enough faith in here to last you till Wednesday.
Come on, sir.
Wednesday. 3 days. You can't live on whatever experience you had here today because you're going to run out of gas by the end of the week. You need to be in touch with God on a daily basis. You need to have so much faith, Tammy, that you'll believe He'll be there when I wake up in the morning. You need to believe God is so involved in your life that when you're driving down the street and someone cuts you off, you can say, "Thank you, Jesus, I just avoided a wreck because you're with me." And you got to recognize that, because some of the things that happen around us, Reuben, we get so in a hurry and so involved in our life, we don't see the hand of God that is protecting and leading us all the time. Sometimes we have to believe that I know that bill's coming due, but God will provide. And I have been there and got that check the day before I needed it. I've been there. I'm not talking about something I read to you. I'm talking about something I experienced. And you too, you guys have too. Go to the other picture, please. They're looking for something from God, and they are getting it because God will provide. And he's teaching them that. How? One of the things he's doing is showing them an object lesson. If you go try and take more than you need, it won't be worth anything tomorrow because you need a fresh supply from God. What did I tell you that one of the things worship does? It lifts your burden. We need our burdens lifted on a daily basis. Dear Lord. But here's another interesting thing that I found in this. It said, let every man gather according to his one's need. Everybody has different needs. But God is showing us, just take what you deal with this today. Let tomorrow deal with itself. I believe we have scripture we can refer to that'll tell us that very thing. And God also showed us an important thing that I think we have just totally abandoned. It appears God thinks the Sabbath is important. And He provides for you so that you don't gather food on the Sabbath. This always gets Art wound up. The manna, the bread from heaven that the Bible keeps talking about, not manna. The bread from heaven is a powerful picture of Jesus himself. The bread from heaven. After feeding the 5,000, Jesus had a discussion with people who wanted him to keep on feeding them with his miraculous power. If he can do that once, he can do that every day. I can quit my job, we'll go to dinner with and we're going to have a nice, peaceful life. They wanted Jesus to provide for them just as Israel was provided for with manna from the wilderness. And that is why Jesus said in reply, most assuredly, I say to you, Moses did not give you the bread from heaven, but my Father gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is he who comes down from earth and gives life to the world. Bread from heaven, not what is it? Jesus is the bread from heaven, and we have to receive him like Israel received bread from heaven. Now, what does that mean? Well, first of all, I like this. It has to mean that you're aware of your need. In this case with the Israelites, they were hungry. Wouldn't that not be a requirement for you to need Jesus? Each for himself, family by family. I can't live off your experience, Reuben. I just can't do it. I need Jesus for myself. How often do I need Jesus? Every day. Every day. Daily. Bread from heaven. How do I need Jesus? I need Jesus humbly, perhaps, even on my knees, picking up the bread from heaven. With gratitude, knowing we don't deserve it. They didn't work to get manna. God gave it to them. And it required them to eat it and take the gift inside to our innermost being. This is Jesus we're talking about. Now, something I put in here that I read from a Jewish commentary. Some of these guys are pretty sharp. Listen to this. I like this. Do you know how often, if I'm eating bread 40 years straight, how much I'm going to dislike bread after about a month or less? Oh, we're going to eat that stuff again today? Maybe not. Listen to this. The Jewish legends supposedly tell us what this bread from heaven tasted like. One only had to desire a certain dish, Mexican food, and no sooner had he the dish he desired. The same food had a different taste to everyone who partook of it. According to his age, to the little children, it tasted like milk. To the strong youth, like bread. To the old men, like honey. To the sick, they barely steeped in oil and honey, but they also wrote that manna was bitter in the mouth of Gentiles. The guidelines for gathering bread of heaven were given to us, and it gives you the ability from an American or from a non-believer standpoint, you can have security through abundance. We hear that every day in the lifestyle we live. What about gather only enough for the day? That's not go along with security for abundance. And the other is God teaching them to rely on Him daily. Each person is together only enough for that day. They must do the work, not rely on someone else. I think the rock and the water will leave for next week. And I'll leave you with this. One of Moses' most characteristic and praiseworthy traits was that he took his difficulties to God. He unloaded on God. And I told you earlier, one of the distinct traits of worship is to lighten your load. We'll talk about Horeb next week. I'm done.